Herzlich willkommen zur Übergabe. Heute zum Tag der Pflegenden mit einer besonderen Folge. Doch bevor es losgeht, haben wir noch eine wichtige Mitteilung für dich, denn wir haben Zuwachs bekommen. Unser Team verstärken ab jetzt Jessica und Florian. Sie unterstützen uns ab jetzt tatkräftig und wir sagen herzlichen Dank, dass ihr euch gemeldet habt auf unseren Aufruf und sagen herzlich willkommen. Naja, und wie ihr wisst, haben wir die Übergabebriefings ja auch gestartet. Mittlerweile sind 3 erschienen. Das sind kleine Newsletter, in denen wir Studien ziemlich kurz und knackig zusammenfassen. Und du kannst sie auf unserer Homepage lesen oder eben auch per Newsletter bekommen. Und wenn du die Briefings bekommen möchtest, dann freuen wir uns, wenn du auch eine Mitgliedschaft abschließt. Dazu haben wir verschiedene Möglichkeiten geschaffen. Entweder für dich allein oder eine Mitgliedschaft bei der Übergabe für dich und einen Kollegen oder eine Kollegin. Und wir haben auch Pakete für Teams, Schulklassen, Kurse oder auch ganze Schulen oder Kliniken. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch mit einer größeren Gruppe anmelden wollt, dann habt ihr die Möglichkeit, das zu tun. Sollte das nicht ausreichen, dann meldet euch gerne bei uns. Das Ganze kannst du ziemlich easy 30 Tage lang testen und ist natürlich auch monatlich wieder kündbar. Und wenn du also auch die Briefings bekommen möchtest, dann schau entweder in die Shownotes dieser Episode vorbei oder besuch unsere Homepage übergabe-podcast.de. Dort findest du Infos zur Mitgliedschaft und den Briefings. Und jetzt viel Spaß mit der Spezialfolge der Übergabe zum Tag der Pflegenden, die uns leider tontechnisch nicht so gut gelungen ist, da wir nach Norwegen telefoniert haben, aber inhaltlich wird sie sich auf jeden Fall lohnen, von daher viel Spaß.
Ja, herzlich willkommen zu einer neuen Folge von der Übergabe. Wir haben uns heute etwas Neues ausgedacht und zwar werden wir den Großteil der Folge mit euch auf Englisch reden. Mein Name ist Lukas, ihr kennt mich vielleicht aus dem Pflege-Update und ich bin heute nicht alleine. Mit mir sind Michelle und Franzi noch hier bei der Aufnahme dabei.
Hi.
Und genau, ich habe ja schon angekündigt, wir sprechen heute nur auf Englisch und das liegt daran, dass wir eine Folge aufnehmen mit dem ICN, also dem International Council of Nurses. So I'm going to switch to English now and I'm very happy to welcome Bjøro, who's the second vice president of the ICN. Hello, Karen.
Yeah, I can just say a few words in German to start out with. Guten Tag. Danke. Dankeschön for the invitation to speak on Übergabe. I'm very pleased that you've invited me to speak about ICN. It's very important for German nurses and nursing students to know what ICN is.
Yeah, that's true. That's why we contacted you. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit about your career as a professional nurse and doing nursing politics, I think, for quite a bit now.
Yes, I've been working in nursing policy development for a number of years now. I originally come from the United States, but when I moved to Norway, I got married and moved to Norway, I decided I needed a career that would have international significance. So it just seemed appropriate to choose nursing because nursing is a very global profession. And I decided to go to nursing school, nursing college here in Norway, where I'm living at the present time. I've lived here for 50 years, and I've been a nurse for 40 some years now. And I've never regretted that, of course. And my clinical background is in intensive care nursing. And I really enjoyed the one-to-one nurse-patient relationship in the intensive care unit. So that's why I chose to work there. And then I became involved in quality assurance, quality improvement, and I went into nursing administration. I was the chief nurse of Ullevål University Hospital for a number of years, and then I decided to do a career switch and went into to research. So I did my doctoral dissertation at the University of Iowa in the United States and concentrated or focused on delirium in older adults with hip fracture.
Mm-hmm.
And that, in many ways, that's a long way from the career change that I again took in 2017 when I was elected to the executive committee of the Norwegian Nurses Organization as the second vice president there. And I held that position for 8 years. And it was during that time that I also became very interested, or even more interested, I might say, in international nursing. I represented the Norwegian Nurses Organization at the European Federation of Nurses Associations and with the European Forum of National Nurses and Midwives Associations, and also was elected to the board of the International Council of Nurses. And I'm in my second term, which expires in 2025.
Okay, that's very interesting, I think. Maybe you can explain to our listeners what... So you mentioned the ICN, and that's the organization we want to talk about today. Maybe you can explain to our listeners what the ICN is and what it does, and maybe a little bit of an historic background of the ICN.
Sure. Well, the ICN was established in 1899. So next year, we'll have our 125th anniversary. Today, ICN, the International Council of Nurses, is the global voice of nursing. There are roughly 28 million nurses in the world, and nurses make up roughly half of the total workforce, the health workforce. And ICN speaks at the global policy table on behalf of the largest health profession on earth. So that's a pretty important position to be in. And ICN was one of the very first organizations to be recognized as an official partner of the World Health Organization when it was established in 1948. And of course, in 1948, ICN had already been around for almost a half a century. So that was an important contribution to the World Health Organization, and it brought the voice of the largest profession to the table and to speak on behalf of nurses. And as we all know, the importance of having a global voice clearly came out during the recent COVID pandemic, which is, of course, still ongoing. And this showed us that in an emergency of global extent, of global importance, it's really important to have a global voice that really can consolidate the voice of nurses around the world and bring that to the global policy table, bring that to the attention of the World Health Organization that had a very important role in coordinating efforts to overcome the pandemic around the world. So that really shows, in a situation where nurses were at the forefront, that their voice was heard loudly and clearly at the World Health Organization.
So you said the ICN was established in 1899. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Yes, and 125 years.
Yeah, who founded it back then?
It was a British nurse by the name of Ethel Bedford Fenwick.
Oh, okay.
And of course, we all know that UK or the British nurses were very much in the forefront through the efforts of Florence Nightingale, who founded modern nursing. And so they had come quite far when it comes to establishing nursing education in the UK. And Ethel Bedford Fenwick thought, she was a policymaker, very involved in policy. She thought that it was very important that nurses were brought together from around the world to share experiences and to show solidarity to each other, as this was 1899, of course, is known for, it was a period of great progressivism, social progressivism. There was a lot of healthcare reform that was going on at the time. And of course, women's rights were very much in the forefront of developments at that time. ICN was actually the first international organization for health professionals and also for women at the time, because of course, nursing was a women's profession at that time. I know even in Norway, the first male nurse came around 1958, I believe. And so that was a rather late development. So this was part of the beginnings of ICN. Of course, it was very small to start out with, the nurses from the UK and Ireland, but they also met with nurses from the United States. Of course, they had a common language, so they were able to communicate easily together. But already the first meeting was held then in 1899, so they were able to start thinking about developing an organization with statutes, a constitution for the organization, etc. And they had their first ICN Congress. It was held already in 1901, so 2 years later. And it's quite interesting then that the second ICN Congress was held in Berlin in 1904. So German nurses were very early on, they were very much involved in the work of ICN and establishing it already at this early time. And German nurses were affiliated already in 1904. And then also in the fourth ICN Congress was also held in Germany, and that was in 1912. It was held in Cologne. And this meant a lot to me because this was the year that 1912 was the year that the Norwegian Nurses Organization was founded. And the president of the Norwegian Nurses Organization was at the meeting in Cologne, or in Köln, as we say in Norwegian. So it's very important. And today ICN has grown. So today we have 135 member associations. And ICN is an umbrella organization for 135 national nurses associations around the world. This is how you become a member of ICN. So individual nurses are not members of ICN. It's the National Nurses Association that is the member and that applies for membership. So today we have 135 members from around the world. There are 6 regions of the world. These are the same regions that we have for the World Health Organization. That's Europe, which also includes Central Asia, Africa, the Americas, both North and South America, the Western Pacific, Southeast Asia, which includes India and the Eastern Mediterranean, which is the smallest of our regions. But we have membership applications still today. And the Ivory Coast was our most recent admitted member. And ICN headquarters is located in Geneva. And this is quite important because the World Health Organization is also located in Geneva. ICN has a lovely building that overlooks Lake Geneva. And I know that they appreciate having visitors to come and to get to know the ICN headquarters. So you're all welcome to come, form a delegation, of course, and make a study trip to Geneva to visit the World Health Organization. The Red Cross, the international headquarters, is also there. And of course, ICN is important.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I've seen on the website of ICN, I think there's kind of a timeline updated with all the history of ICN. We will put it in the show notes for everyone who's more interested in getting to know the history of ICN. So you mentioned back then when ICN was founded, it was to share experiences and I think you said share solidarity between nurses. Would you say that those founding elements are still there today, or is it something that has changed over the years?
Of course, we're a very different organization today than we were back then. And in 1899 and moving forward, nurses were just getting organized within their own countries at the national level. Like I mentioned, ICN was established before the Norwegian Nurses Organization. So for my own organization here in Norway, it was important for them to reach out and to be inspired by what was happening within international nursing and with, at the national level in other countries, to be inspired, to receive encouragement. Some of the letters that were sent from the first president and vice president of ICN were very important source of inspiration to the Norwegian nurses who founded our organization. And I think this still holds today, that there are many nurses around the world who are not organized, but who look to ICN for inspiration, and also for sharing of experience on how do you actually go about establishing a national nurses organization if you don't have one. But of course, today, our 135 members vary quite a bit in what kind of organizations they are. Some are unions, some are only professional organizations concerned with professional issues. Of course, if they're a union, then they're more concerned about the social economic welfare of nurses. And we also have some regulatory bodies that are members of ICN. For example, the Spanish Council of Nurses is a known regulatory body. And some organizations are a combination of these. For example, the Norwegian Nurses Organization is both a professional organization, but they're also a union. So we're really a conglomeration of different types of organizations. And this has a really important bearing on the policies that ICN is involved in. As we need to serve our members and to see their needs, which is highly related to what kind of organization they are. But at the international level, ICN is very much involved in policy development. And ICN speaks on behalf of nurses, as I said, we're the global voice of nursing. And we have very close relationships with the World Health Organization. There are regular meetings with WHO, both in Geneva, but also in the regions. And we also have a close relationship to the International Labour Organization, which is also an organization under the United Nations. And we work with the World Bank as well and other international organizations. So we're well positioned to speak across the many organizations, mainly at the international level, but also at the regional level.
So, as you said, I can imagine it's quite complicated to form one voice for nurses when there are 100, I think you said 135 members.
That's correct, yes.
When there are 135 members, it can be very difficult to form one voice. How is this achieved within the organization?
Well, the ICN, we do have a mission statement. We have a set of values that we use as the baseline for our policy development. And for example, one of the main sources of how we make decisions is embedded within the ICN Code of Ethics, which of course is one of the main, consensus documents that we have within ICN. We recently revised the Code of Ethics. It was first developed in 1953, and this is really a standard. It's a guide to nurses on decision-making and enables nurses to provide the highest quality care to everyone they serve, no matter what the circumstances might be. Of course, nursing is one of the most trusted professions in the world, and as such, nursing is held to a high standard. And in our society today, issues of social justice, for example, have come to the forefront. And as a profession, we need to ensure that nurses are seen as allies in the fight against discrimination and champions of human rights. And this really binds nurses together around the world, this code of ethics. And it's an important guide also to the board of ICN when we engage in policy development. And as I said, we recently revised the Code of Ethics, and today the Code of Ethics emphasizes to a greater extent the importance of international or global solidarity as an important value in nursing.
Yeah, I can remember when I first started in nursing and had my training years, the ICN Code of Ethics was the first thing where I learned that there is the ICN. And I think it was updated in 2021. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, that's quite new.
Yeah. And I think we will also put the Code of Ethics in the show notes for everyone who wants to just read and see what the ICN does.
I mean, you can see that it's very important as a foundation for all of the other work that we do within ICN. So whatever we do, we can look back to the code of ethics and make sure that whatever policies we're working on, that those are in line with the code of ethics. Of course, it's the cornerstone of nursing, you might say, as our basic standard.
I just wanted to make clear to the listeners, because you said that there are 135 member associations, that there's also German member association within the ICN, right? It's the DBFK. So all the listeners who are members of the DBFK are also members of the ICN, right?
Yes, DBFK has been a valued member of ICN for many years. As I said, German Nurses Association was brought into ICN already in 1904 and has been a continuous member since then. A valued member, you've had members on the board of ICN. I mentioned that Franz Wagner, the former Secretary General of DBFK, was on the board for many years, and he was also the first vice president of ICN. And I haven't looked back to see how many times Germany has had the presidency of ICN, but it made a significant contribution to the development and the stability, the sustainability of ICN. So thanks to all the German nurses for that support, of course.
That's actually great to hear, I would say. You talked a lot about like nursing and nurses. Is there an ICN definition for nurse and for nursing?
Yes, and Lucas mentioned that the Code of Ethics was one of his first recollections of hearing about ICN. And I think that the definition of nursing is all that ICN has developed consensus on, is also one of the first, meetings that many nurses have with ICN. It was a nurse named Virginia Henderson, and she defined nursing. And this definition of nursing that she presented was also brought in and woven into the definition of nursing that ICN developed. And ICN definition of nursing has, of course, evolved over time, but in line with what Virginia Henderson stated in 1977, that the unique function of nurses is caring for individuals, whether they're sick or well, and makes assessments on their responses to their health status, and assists them in the performance of those activities that contribute to health or recovery or to a dignified death that they would have performed without help if they had had the necessary strength, will, or knowledge. And nurses do this in such a way as to help them to gain full or partial independence as rapidly as possible. So this is in many ways the definition of nursing that I have experienced as I went to nursing school in the 80s. So this was a very prominent definition of nursing at that time. And it's still very much part of the core definition of nursing in the ICN definition. The ICN definition of nursing as it exists today, of course, is on the website of ICN, so it's very easily available. And many nursing students, of course, who are in search of how do we define nursing, often can find the definition of nursing on the ICN website. I think that pretty much is the way we think of nursing today as well.
Yeah, I think that's actually really helpful, because oftentimes you look for a good definition and you just trying to make up your mind, and then knowing that there is a very good definition, an international definition.
Yeah.
We could also put that in the show notes, I think, just the link to the website.
Link to the definition of nursing. That's there, yeah. ICN also has a definition of a nurse, and a nurse is defined as a person who has completed a program of basic generalized nursing education and is authorized by the appropriate regulatory authority to practice nursing in his or her country. And that's a very broad definition. And of course, it means that nursing might be different in different parts of the world, different countries. But since we all look to the definition of nursing, of course, the curriculum in the particular educational program might vary.
You also mentioned nursing students as some kind of the future of the profession. In what way would you say can nursing students also engage internationally? Is it good for nursing students to connect internationally, or would you say they should focus first to become a nurse and then go out and see what's out there, what they can do, where they can engage?
Well, global nursing has also become a part of our ICN Codex, our ICN Code of Ethics. So being engaged in international nursing is very important in policy development. And it's something that I believe personally, and I've worked for this quite diligently within the board of ICN to strengthen the voice of nursing students and early career nurses in ICN. And this is one of the main issues that we'll be discussing at the next General Assembly of ICN, which is called the Council of National Representatives. It'll be held in late June this year. And in parallel with the General Assembly of ICN, the Council of National Representatives, there is the Student Assembly, the ICN Student Assembly. And nursing students from all over the world come to attend the Student Assembly. And one of the students does come to the General Assembly of ICN and gives a report on what the students have been considering in their discussions. And it's a very important time for the, what shall I say, the National Nurses Associations to be listening and being attentive to the voice of nursing students. We have seen some very important developments. I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or if we'll come back to that. But like I said, engagement of nursing students. So student engagement, students and early career nurses are included in an initiative at ICN to bring the voice of nursing students much more to the forefront in the work that ICN is doing. We realize that nursing students and early career nurses really need to learn early on in their career, already as students, about policy and policy development within health and healthcare. And we know that the medical students and pharmacy students have a very strong global voice for their students, and they have a very strong organization, whereas nursing students have not had the very strong international organization at the global level. And so this is something that many nursing students have been asking for, wanting to be involved in policy development when it comes to global health. So ICN has had 2 student nurses who were working on very early on developing how can we connect nursing students closer to ICN. So ICN board adopted a program whereby we would have a student steering group. And we have a person or an employee working at the ICN headquarters who coordinates the student steering group. Her name is Erica Bruton. And the student steering group includes 1 student or early career nurse from each of the 6 regions of ICN. And they meet on a regular basis, and they've developed a strategy for how they can advance the work of student nurses within ICN. What we're working on now is what kind of organizational structure should we have for nursing students within ICN? And we are engaging in discussions with our member associations. Now, not all national nurses associations have an embedded student group the way that you have in DBFK. Mm-hmm. You have the network for students and early career nurses. And some countries, for example, in North America, Canada, and the United States, nursing students are organized more through the university, and they have a completely independent student organization for nursing students. So that's one other model. But in Europe, most nursing student organizations are embedded or organized within the National Nurses Association. And so one of the decisions we have to make within ICN is what kind of organization do we want for nursing students? And we really haven't landed yet. I'd like to see them embedded within ICN. We have some very good examples of that in Europe. But of course, if those countries that don't have an embedded association find it challenging to think about how they would go about this. And then there are other regions, for example, WIPRO, the Western Pacific region, where it's not as common to have a student association. So this is the big question. What should we do? And like I said, we haven't landed yet. But I think that it's really extremely important that students are brought in early, because these are the members of the organization once they graduate from nursing school. So I think it's really important to engage them early.
Yeah, but I think you're right when you're saying you want to include nursing students early on in their careers. I think it's very important that also for your professional development that you have opinions about nursing policies and or nursing politics. Yeah, that you grow with time and that you maybe take more responsibility later on in your career, but also at the beginning that you know that nurses can have a voice both nationally and internationally, and I think ICN is on a good way of including nursing students more. I think it will be very helpful in the future.
Yes, and like I said, nursing students can come to Montreal, for example, in late June and join the student assembly and just become part of the discussion is very important. And it takes time for an old organization like ICN to, take on some of these new challenges. But I think we're working on it. So, and I'm the chair of the Student Engagement Committee within the board of ICN. So I speak on behalf of the future for nursing students and early career nurses within ICN. So I am really promoting nursing students as strongly as I can. But we have to take one step at a time.
And I think it can be really interesting for young nursing students to be part of like this forming a group and bring the young voice to an old organization. I think that can be really like interesting, and I don't know. Yeah, you can do something actively and shape the future in a way. I think that's really, really good. Yeah.
And we know too that the World Health Organization has really putting the youth voice, the voice of youth, on their agenda. And it's really important that nursing students are also taking their seat at the table when youth and the policies of WHO are formed regarding young people. We know, for example, that the medical students, the pharmacy students, and other health professions are very much involved in international policy, health policy development. And we just need to make sure that nursing students are also at the table to learn to discuss policy at a high level. And we know that nursing students are very much engaged in policy issues. Gender issues, for example, are very important to nursing students. Those are being issues that are very much discussed at the global level.
I can imagine that also mental health is a very big issue for nursing students. As you mentioned before, we had or have a still ongoing pandemic with all the education switching from the universities or the nursing schools to online virtual learning platforms. And yeah, as for everyone else, not be able to see your fellow students or see your families, and then the different way of working, and maybe also working in settings where you didn't have the training before as a nursing students, or you didn't have enough training, and then that you had to work during the pandemic. I think mental health is also a big issue for nursing students and will be in the future. And I think this is also something that politicians and global politics should focus on.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It was really a huge challenge for nursing students. And across Europe, for example, where there's a common standard for nursing education that stretches all across Europe, of course, through the directive on, that impacts nursing education and defines the qualifications that you have to have in order to be able to work across the European countries.
So you talked a lot about like bringing the voice of the youth into the ICN. What other strategic priorities are there at the moment?
Well, actually, there are a number of priorities that ICN is looking at. And I might say that when we meet, for example, at the ICN Congress in Montreal, there are two parts to that Congress. Part one is when all of the members of ICN come together into what is called the Council of National Representatives. And this is a 3-day meeting where we make decisions on the directions of ICN. We make amendments to the Constitution, elect a board of directors, etc. And it's at this time then that one of the days is the ICN Student Assembly is one of the days. It's held in parallel with what we call the CNR. And some of the items that are on the agenda in many ways show what ICN prioritizes at the present time. One of the items on the agenda is a discussion on the global strategic directions for nursing and midwifery. This is a strategic document that was developed by WHO in close collaboration with the International Council of Nurses and the International Confederation of Midwives. It was adopted by the World Health Assembly in 2021, and the World Health Assembly is the ruling body of the World Health Organization. So the ministers of health from around the world are the members of the World Health Assembly. And in 2021, the World Health Assembly adopted this document, which is the Global Strategic Directions, to support the nursing and midwifery workforce. And there are 4 basic items or areas for the strategic directions: education, ensuring the quality and quantity of nursing education around the world; jobs, different policy decisions that can be made related to decent work for nurses and midwives; leadership. We know that nursing leadership is a key enabling factor to enable the nursing workforce; and service delivery. What kind of models of care will enable nurses to work to the full scope of their education and competence? For example, advanced practice nursing has become very important. So this is one of the main items that we'll be discussing, because each country around the world is accountable to implement global strategic directions for nursing and midwifery by 2025. And we're about halfway to that goal now. So they really have a limited amount of time left to achieve major improvements in education, leadership, service delivery, and jobs. So this is an important document. And what we're asking the members of ICN to report back to ICN, what is the status of the implementation in your country? What is your government doing to implement the strategic directions for nursing and midwifery? And so DBFK has received a survey from ICN asking them to say, what's happening in Germany? What is your government doing to work on implementing these important initiatives to strengthen nursing? And we know that there's a huge nursing shortage. And this is a major issue for ICN now, is how are countries dealing with the nursing shortage? And we know, for example, that many countries are choosing international nurse migration, recruitment of nurses from other countries to high-income countries. And we're taking nurses or recruiting nurses to high-income countries from low-income countries. Many countries that are really struggling to develop their health service and universal health coverage for their own population, and high-income countries are recruiting their nurses. And this can have a very detrimental impact on the health of low-income countries. We know, for example, that Germany is one of the countries that is recruiting from other countries, low-income countries. We know that in some of the high-income countries that this is actually a policy. And it's really, really interesting that some countries in the world, for example, in the UK, where they have one of the best nursing education programs of anywhere in the world, and yet they are recruiting nurses from low-income countries, even countries that are on what is called the red list. And these are countries that are identified by the World Health Organization that should not be recruited from. For example, Nepal and many countries in Africa, for example, that struggle to meet the health needs of their people, the nursing care needs of their people. And yet high-income countries are recruiting from them rather than investing in nursing education in their own country. This is a very hot issue for the World Health Organization. It's a very hot issue within ICN, and it'll be discussed very much at our CNR in Montreal. We're also discussing the strategic plan for ICN. How do we increase our global impact? And this involves, for example, the pandemic. How do we follow up on developments so that we can prevent another pandemic from happening? The nursing shortage, we've called this a global health emergency because we know that if we don't invest in nursing today and in nurses, that we will have a much larger nursing shortage. So we're calling for greater investment in nursing. We're also very much involved in universal health coverage, which is one of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. And it's SDG 3 that addresses healthcare. Health is a human right. And this means that we need to work on universal health coverage so that we have healthcare systems that are able to meet the health needs of the people they're designed to serve. And because of the pandemic, we know that there are many instances where we are not on track to meet the universal health coverage needs of the population. Child immunization programs, for example, were stalled because of the pandemic. And many other, health services were not carried out. Surgeries, for example, elective surgeries, orthopedic surgeries, etc., were postponed due to the pandemic. And we have a huge backlog of health needs that need to be addressed now, at the same time as we have a very large nursing shortage. So this is an important issue. Membership empowerment is also very important. We need to help develop our nursing organizations to help them grow and to thrive. Many of our nurses associations struggle with organizational issues, recruitment of members, etc. And so ICN is going to be working diligently to see how can we empower our members to develop stronger organizations. And this is where I think that recruiting students early in their career is extremely important. And we also need to look at alternative ways of financing ICN and also leadership. We need to develop leadership, and ICN has a number of leadership programs. And then the other issue that I've already spoken to is the engagement of student and early career nurses, which is an important agenda item at the upcoming meeting. So we have a full plate, and we only have 3 days to discuss all of these issues that are so extremely important to nursing and nurses. Luckily, we do have a board of directors, a president. Her name is Pam Cipriano. And we're halfway through our term of office now. And so we're laying a lot of the groundwork for the next 4 years in developing a new strategic plan that will address many of the issues that we've been talking about already today.
You talked a lot about the upcoming Congress. I think it's in Montreal in Canada. What can nurses and visitors expect when they come to the Congress?
Well, the first part, the Congress is perhaps two things, because the first part, of course, is for the member associations, and that's a 3-day meeting where we make new decisions. And this year is not an election year, so that'll come first in 2 years again in Finland. But following then what we call the CNR is the Congress. And one of the first things at Congress is, of course, the parade of associations. So we all line up and march in. The member associations, we can have 3 people from each association. We march in. It's almost like at the Olympics, This is our team.
I just wanted to ask you, how can I imagine? Is it with flags and stuff?
No, well, actually, that's been really a big discussion, because we're not supposed to have flags, but it seems like sometimes the flags appear anyway. But sometimes we have flowers, a bouquet of flowers with the colors in our national flag. And for example, I know the Americans, for example, they dressed out with cowboy boots and cowboy hats. So it's sort of like you could recognize them anyway. So I don't know what the German Nurses Association would do to match that, but we could wear our national costume, for example, but the Norwegian national costume that I have is not really very comfortable if it's very hot, because it's a wool dress. So it would be very hot in some climates where we've had the CNR. So we're actually quite limited in our expression in any case. And I think Germany is as well. You could, lederhosen. What else?
The Bavarian dress.
Yes,
yeah.
The Bavarian dress, that would definitely recognize them as German.
Christian is only here for the technical part, but we both attended one Congress in Barcelona. I think it was in 2016 or 17. And I think the German delegates, they wore like the Bavarian dresses and the lederhosen.
Yeah.
2017, yeah.
But it's an exciting event, and there's an award ceremony, there are speeches, etc. at the opening ceremony of ICN Congress. And then, of course, the next day we go over to having keynote speeches on different topics that are of very important for nurses around the world. Today, I got a message saying that the Mr. Beasley, who was the former director of the World Food Program, is going to be a keynote speaker at Congress this year. So there are very high-profile speakers that come to our Congress and have keynote speeches in plenary session. One thing that we did at the last ICN Congress, which was held in November of 2021, was a regional presentation. So each region is invited to have a regional presentation. So there are 3 board members from the European region, and we are coordinating and working on developing the regional presentation for Europe. So we've invited Hans Kluge, for example, who is the director of the WHO European Regional Office, and also the Nursing and Midwifery Policy Advisor for the European region. Maggie Langens is her name. She'll be having a talk, and then we have some other prominent speakers who'll be talking at our regional session. We're also going to have 7 case studies, we call them. So they're short videos of different examples of nursing from the European region. And then we're going to have a panel discussion. So this is our contribution. It's a lot of work, but it was really interesting the last time we did it in 2021, that those who were involved in developing everything was online at that time. They became a very close-knit group and got to know each other much better. So I think this is a really good way of developing ICN, because they're your friends in many ways. And when you go to Congress, you get to meet your colleagues from other countries, whether they're close or far distant. So it's really an exciting experience, really, to go to Congress and to meet nurses from other countries. And we know that research, for example, is very much an international endeavor these days. So you might have a research team with members from several different European countries, for example, who are going to present their research at ICN Congress, or even from different regions of the world. So it's a place where you can really meet up with colleagues, have a good time, and also be renewed both in what's happening within nursing, what's happening in health policy development, what are the different challenges that we're facing around the world. For example, climate change is an issue that's really important. Non-communicable diseases. At the last Congress that I was at in Singapore, for example, human trafficking was one issue that was put on the agenda. And it'll be equally exciting to attend this Congress. Gender issues, of course, are very important to ICN at the present time. We realize that we have a gender pay gap, gender or reproductive rights are being challenged in many countries of the world. And so these are very important issues for us to debate and to discuss at ICN Congress.
Yeah, I really, really enjoyed being part of the Congress in 2017. It was really nice as a newly master student, just to meet up with so many like-minded people, and everybody's very motivated and proud to be a nurse. I think sometimes here in Germany, maybe there's some kind of negativity going on in the field of nursing. So it was really nice to just see so many people that want to change things, that want to do stuff. And yeah, it was a really, really nice experience. I can only recommend going at least to one Congress in your life. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think maybe that's especially the situation now, because many nurses around the world have been experiencing mental health issues in the aftermath or during the pandemic and in the aftermath, and have really been discouraged. Many nurses are leaving the profession. So we have many challenges. And I think that perhaps coming together and sharing those experiences and getting it out of your system, it's a way of debriefing about what you've been through, and to understand that you're part of something bigger than what happened in your hospital or in your unit, and a number of strategies that nurses can use or have used in order to revitalize the profession. And I think, being inspired is one of the reasons why I've really enjoyed going to ICN Congress. You really feel invigorated through that engagement that you feel when you're sitting together in an auditorium with 5,000-6,000 other nurses, and everyone's engaged and listening attentively and feeling good about being a nurse. And I think that's really, really important at this time coming out of the pandemic. And I think we're going to feel that revitalization through the Congress.
We're running a bit out of time, I think. There are a few questions left, and I think we can still talk about them. I just want to ask, we talked a lot about the Congress right now, the work of the ICN, but how does the ICN help me as a nurse in my daily work life?
That's really a good question, because I think that in many ways, ICN serves our member associations. And it's our member associations that really have the work of reaching out to their members at the local level. But what we can see is that it's important that we support the National Nurses Associations through providing them, for example, with one of our campaigns, which is International Nurses Day. And I don't know, I would think that you probably do celebrate International Nurses Day on the 12th of May every year. We do in Norway, I know. And in the United States, for example, there's a nursing week. This year, we're having also the European Week of the Nurse and Midwife in Europe. So that's a new development. But ICN has been sort of the motor for establishing International Nurses Day. Every year, they establish a theme for the International Nurses Day, for example. And this is one way that, reaches out, I think, to nurses at the local level, the national level, depending on what your organization does to bring this celebration out to nurses. That's one way that nurses may feel the presence of ICN. Another way that nurses feel the presence, perhaps, of ICN is through, for example, documents like the Code of Ethics. And we've already talked about that. What I'd like to mention is how ICN was a unifying force during the pandemic, because we could see, and we were getting reports, and we were inviting the National Nurses Associations to tell us what was happening in their country. And so we were learning from nurses at the bedside in clinical practice around the world that they didn't have the protective equipment that they needed. And this, of course, when we could see that this picture was repeating itself around the world, we were able to aggregate that information and present this to Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, and say, we're speaking on behalf of nurses around the world. They don't have protective masks. They don't have protective gowns. They don't have the gloves they need. And so in this way, although it's very possible that the nurses at the bedside didn't know that we were doing that, but this was really critical to bring this information at an aggregated level to the attention of the World Health Organization. And they, again, to develop policies and put the responsibility for lack of PPE, as we call it, on the shoulders of the ministries of health around the world. We also know, for example, that many nurses around the world were experiencing fear and anxiety of being infected themselves, or fear of infecting their families. We also know that many nurses died, and very early on, ICN collected information from our national nurses associations on nurse deaths and nurse infections. And of course, we know nurse infections were around 10%. Nurse deaths, we don't have really accurate data, but we know that at least 150,000 nurses around the world died during the pandemic due to them having COVID. We also know that we also saw nurse suicides. And this was part of the burnout and mental health issues that nurses around the world were experiencing during the pandemic. We know that nurses and health personnel suffered both physical and mental exhaustion. And we were able to collect information about that. Many nurses developed post-traumatic stress disorder. And we also know that many nurses were experienced caring for dying patients. And then when they left the hospital, they were confronted by COVID deniers or vaccine deniers. And this creates a conflict a moral conflict, really, because on the one hand, we are obliged, according to our code of ethics, to care for the sick and the dying. Whereas when we went out on the streets and could hear protesters saying there isn't anything like COVID, it really raised a troubling situation for many nurses. It's called moral injury, that the work that they were doing was not valued by society. Even though many people were out there clapping for us and patting us on the back, et cetera, and thanking us for the work we were doing, on the other hand, we saw this other picture. And then we also saw that there were very few nurses who were on the scene. When governments, for example, the Minister of Health held a briefing, for example, or if there was a news briefing, press orientation of the press. For example, when there weren't very few women, there were very few nurses who were present on the stage discussing the situation with the media. And this means that nurses were not being involved in decision-making to the extent that they should have been, because they were on the front line. They knew a lot about what was going on in clinical practice. And we know that now in a report that ICN released about 2 weeks ago, called Recover to Rebuild, because we had another report that was called Sustain and Retain. And that was released in 2022. So this was another report that was very similar and emphasized that strategies that we had proposed in the 2021 document were still very important. So now we can see in this report, 40 to 80% of nurses have experienced symptoms of psychological distress. Nurses' intention to leave the profession have risen to 20% or more. And in many countries, annual hospital turnover rates have increased to 10% and even more. So ICN now, already in 2021, ICN referred to this phenomena as the mass trauma of the global nursing workforce. We are now calling this situation with the nursing shortage a global health emergency. So we're calling for massive investment in the nursing workforce. This must happen. We hear a lot of talk about the importance of being a resilient nurse, but what we really need is resilient healthcare systems for nurses to work in, because it's not the responsibility of the individual nurse to create this healthcare system. It's really the responsibility of national governments and employers to develop a work environment and a working situation where nurses can actually do their job, what they're educated to do. And this is critical message from ICN on behalf of nurses of the world to invest. And what we need to do is we need to address the mental health needs of nurses. We need to see respect for nursing and the nurses and the nursing profession. And we need to see workforce impact assessments. What's happening to the nursing profession? Governments need to be aware and need to be concerned about what is happening to this vital health resource. We need safe staffing levels. Nurses are caring for too many patients at one time. And this is an important we've known this even before the pandemic, but it's becoming even more critical as the nursing shortage increases. ICN has also been very concerned about vaccination status for nurses. We're calling for full vaccination programs for all nurses. In many countries, especially in low-income countries, many nurses have not even received a single first dose of vaccine. This is totally unacceptable. We need to see a review and expansion of the domestic nurse education system. They need to look at how many nurses are they educating and how do they need to step up, not just go to red-listed countries and recruit nurses from impoverished countries. They need to step up and educate more nurses, invest in the retention of nurses through better developing more attractive career choices for nurses, implementing policies for improved career structures, optimizing the workforce by implementing advanced practice roles, advanced nurse practitioner roles, for example. Providing technological support for nurses is also a critical issue, so that we're not just doing paperwork, but that we're actually freed up to work with our patients. And also that governments need to monitor and track how self-sufficient they are when it comes to their nurse workforce. So these are really important issues that ICN is putting on the table. And ICN president, Pam Cipriano, says that nurses are the professionals who can lead us out of this post-pandemic slump in healthcare that we're experiencing with backlog of patients who have not received treatment. But we can only do that if there's enough of us, and if we're properly supported and paid, and if the fragile health systems that we work in are rejuvenated. And that requires government investment.
So one thing you could say, or what you could say to politicians would be not talk about nurses, but talk with nurses to make healthcare systems better or improve them, or as you say in the report, rebuild them after the pandemic. Is it correct?
Yes, because we need to rebuild our health systems, our healthcare systems, and many of them are broken. The pandemic has really revealed how fragile our health systems are. We were already experiencing poor staffing levels before the pandemic, but the pandemic really revealed that things really broke apart. Much health systems broke down during the pandemic, didn't they? And this is unacceptable. So the world needs governments to step up and invest in nursing and health in the health workforce. So we'll be hearing a lot about this. It's going to be a major issue at the World Health Assembly this year. We know that the regional office for our region, the European region, has released a report that is called Health and Care Workforce in Europe, Time to Act. And our regional director, Hans Kluge, said that if we do not act now and act sufficiently, it's like a ticking bomb. And you can look at the report and see, what does the workforce, the health workforce, not just nurses, but the health workforce in Germany look like? Because we can see that the medical doctors in Germany, many of them are very, aged, whereas the nursing workforce in Germany is younger. And so what's going to happen in a few years' time when a great number of physicians in Germany retire? Who's going to care for patients? Are there enough nurses to do that? Or to step up through more advanced roles, for example? So we have a lot of challenges that are on the horizon, and they're already upon us, really. So it's really like a carousel that's moving around, and we really have to hold on. And we have to act, even though the carousel is going round and round.
Yeah, I think what you just said, it sums it all up, that we always that nurses have to evolve with the system and have to, maybe at some time step up to take new roles and to just make sure that the healthcare systems are still working around the world. And with an organization as ICN that combines all the knowledge and every aspect of nursing globally, the nursing voice is united. And I think that is very important, or will be very important in the future.
Yes, I think that ICN has really had a very significant role, and this has come very much to the forefront during the pandemic, because ICN has really been speaking out on what's happening to the nursing workforce, what has been happening in our healthcare systems, and really laying it on the line. And ICN has been, our representatives have been interviewed on many news media, for example, and really, not just talking to the politicians, but also talking to the population in general about what's been happening. And it's critical to really get the message out. And the importance of investment now is critical, because it takes time to educate a nurse. It takes time to build healthcare systems, and it takes a great deal of investment. And of course, now we're in a situation where we're also facing financial challenges in many countries. And so we need to make the right choices now, because we know that if we don't make the good choices today, it will be even more costly in the future in terms of poor health of our populations. So it's very critical.
Then thank you, Karen, for finding the time today and talking to us. And I'm going to switch back to German now because it's easier for me to do the outro.
Can I just say thank you so much for inviting me? And I've really enjoyed talking with you about the role of ICN and in joining global nursing together. We're the sort of the glue that, or the umbrella that binds us all together. So thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for your insights.
And thank you for this conversation. Really enjoyed talking with you today. Thank you.
Okay, damit sind wir jetzt auch am Ende unserer Folge. Ich kann nur sagen, ich habe einen ganz schönen Knoten in der Zunge. Ich bin es überhaupt nicht mehr gewöhnt, so lange am Stück Englisch zu reden und ich hoffe, ihr verzeiht mir verzeiht uns den einen oder anderen Versprecher, wobei ich glaube, dass Franzi das deutlich besser gemacht hat als ich.
Nein.
Ich weiß nicht, wie es dir geht, Franzi, jetzt hast du auch einen Knoten in der Zunge.
Knoten in der Zunge und Knoten im Kopf.
Knoten im Kopf auf. Ich finde es auf jeden Fall sehr interessant, auch mal so eine internationale Perspektive zu haben. Gebt uns gerne Feedback, wie ihr diese erste englische Übergabe, die Handover-Folge sozusagen fandet. Und habt ihr noch abschließende Worte? Habe ich noch was vergessen?
Vielleicht sollten wir kurz sagen, du hast Michelle ja am Anfang angekündigt, aber leider hatte sie zwischendurch technische Probleme. Deswegen hat man sie in dieser Folge jetzt nicht gehört. Beim nächsten Mal dann Michelle. Ansonsten bleibt uns nur noch die Verabschiedung. Bis zum nächsten Mal.
Auf Wiedersehen und bis zum nächsten Mal.